We are studying chapter 2 in Tanya. Now, what we explained last week, if I recall, was the relation he discusses between the description in the Torah of the creation of heavens and earth, of everything, which in relation to what we're discussing, the human soul, the human psyche, the two souls of a human being. So what we discussed up until now, the animal soul, is a part of the creation of all reality. What a person is another creation. One of creations, a living creation. Like that's why it's called an animal soul. Like any animal, it's part of the physical reality. Our physical existence is a living physical existence. That's the animal soul. But in addition to that, the Torah describes how after creating man, HaKadosh Baruch Hu then breathes a soul of life into this person. It's like an additional breath of life inserted into the existing person. And the Alter Rebbe quotes what the Zohar explains, what's explained in other places, that this is referring to the holy soul, to the godly soul. And in order to explain the difference between the two, he just contemplates on the literal meaning of these idioms, where all of creation is created from speech, as opposed to the soul being a vayipach, that's the word, a breath. And as we explained last week, in two words, that when we say speech, the allegory of speech, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks reality, is implying that reality is all something he's doing. It's an action, as we implied. It's like when I speak, if I correlate this to the allegory, the human allegory of speaking, so that the phrase speech is referring to the action that I do when I speak. It's not referring, as he explicitly says in other places, it's not referring to the physical reality of my lips or the physical reality of the air exiting my lungs. And the action of speech, obviously any action I do, I'm acting upon a reality. So I'm acting with existing lips and I'm acting on existing air, but that's not the allegory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is existing with his action, he's existing reality. So he's not acting upon an existing matter. He's existing the matter. How is he doing that? The Torah says that he brings reality into existence through speech. So what matter is the speech itself, as explained in length in Shari Chud Ve'emunah, we studied before. And the point, again, in one word, is that all of creation, all of reality, all of physical reality is actually an act, or is a, the phrase we used last week is that the nouns are verbs. That was how we phrased it last week. That Hashem is doing reality. So again, this is something that, as he says in Shari Chud Ve'emunah, is something that's somewhat difficult to and not to understand, but to digest. The phrase there is Hashevot levavecha. It's a concept that even once you fathom, it needs to constantly be returned to your heart. It's very counterintuitive to grasp reality as an abundance of verbs. We experience creation as a lot of nouns, things. There's a table, there's a chair, there's a wall. And the Torah doesn't describe reality as a bunch of things. It describes reality, again, because the Torah is describing HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating reality. So the Torah always describes reality as an abundance of actions, of verbs. It's not that there is a table. Hashem is making a table. So the table is something that's being done. How can HaKadosh Baruch Hu do things that are so physical? Okay, that's called ex nihilo. Hashem knows how to create. We don't create in our actions. But still, the reality is an abundance of actions. And that's, as we explained last week, that's the allegory of speech. When you say speech, you mean the action of speech. As opposed to that, the godly soul is not something acted, just like when I speak. So the breath of air, I don't act the air. The air is part of the existing reality, which I act upon. So when I speak, then again the movements, like the actions that I do in order to make sound, that's something that I create, as if ex nihilo. And so it doesn't really, it's not yesh, it's not part of my essence, it's not part of what is priorly to creation or priorly to my speech. It's something that's renewed by my actions. Therefore, it's also not tangible in the allegory. Like the action of speech is not something you can put your finger on. It's a concept I can understand. When I speak, then I'm doing something. But the doing isn't a thing. It's just, and it's an action. It's a verb. It's not a noun, like we described. But the air that I'm acting upon, the breath coming out of my lungs, coming out of my heart, coming out of myself. So the physical breath is something tangible. Obviously, I didn't create that when I speak. It was tangible before I spoke as well. But that's exactly what the allegory is coming to say. That saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathes a soul of life, the phrase breathing is implying that this soul isn't something new that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. It's not an action that HaKadosh Baruch Hu renewed. It's part of what was before. It's part of his inherent existence that he then breathes into the body which he acted. And so there's a part of Hashem's self revealed within the renewed speech, the renewed word of Hashem.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
are you saying that the godly soul is a noun?
Exactly. The
Okay.
godly soul is a noun. I mean, only Hashem is a noun. That's the only thing that is.
Okay.
The godly soul is a breath and not an action, is saying that the godly soul is not something that Hashem does. It's part of his being. It's part of the nounness. That's the precise phrase here. Chelek elok amimal. It's part of the noun.
Okay.
We wouldn't say the godly soul is a noun in of itself. The only noun, again, in our allegory, the only noun that could exist is only Hashem. You can only call Hashem a noun. Only Hashem is considered an existing thing. And anything else that exists is something that he's doing, he's existing. So it's not really a noun, it's a verb. It's all things that Hashem is doing. So that the Torah describes the soul as a noun is implying that the soul is part of Hashem's inherent initial self. It's not a renewed action. It's part of the isness of Hashem. That's exactly what the Alter Rebbe is describing. So what's the conclusion? Like what's the image, the concoction of these two is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates many, many creations. And again, relatively, we're calling all these things verbs. Like the word for thing in Hebrew is davar. That's how you say thing, which means a word. You're like a speaking. Everything is speaking. It's a verb. Which verb is it? It's the verb of speech. That's the action. So we're surrounded by verbs. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's verbalization, his actions are entirely tangible and real. But nonetheless, it's all of these creations are things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing. It's all actions of Hashem. That's why our reality is called the world of action, because it's the world of Hashem's doing. That's all of creation, including my body and my animal soul, my sense of self. It's all things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, spirituality and physicality, everything, all of creation is all. That's what the concept of creation means, ex nihilo, that it's all a renewed reality that Hashem is doing. Hashem acts this. And our existence is what Hashem is acting. That's all of creation. Now, in addition to that, in a Jew's body, in this action of Hashem, Hashem also breathes or reveals himself, which is not an action. It doesn't create himself. He already is. It's part of the isness. That's called breathing, a breath of life. Not acting, breathing. That's what we discussed up until now. So the result He has two souls. That's exactly what he wants to describe here. That you have a creation, which is an action like any other creation. But there are certain creations, that's what a Jew is, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu then breathes into. So the body is a creation, but the godly soul isn't a creation. It's part of the noun of reality. It's not something new. It's not an action. It's not something Hashem acts. It's something that Hashem is. And that isness is exposed in this action, this body, which is an action. Okay, so the sum of Hashem's actions, his self is exposed. That's called a godly soul in a body. And the word for that is the difference between the breath of speech and the action of speech. It's a very, very precise allegory. I don't know if there's a more precise allegory in the entire Torah than the allegory of dibur, of speech. I mean, obviously, any allegory in the Torah is completely precise. And what I meant is in the Torah of Chassidus, like in the study in the philosophy of Chassidus, the most precise allegory you can contemplate on maybe is this allegory again, because this is the allegory of the Torah. It's not even an allegory. This is what it is. This is the truth of creation. It's all Hashem speaking.
Okay, Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to say this, but I'm not getting the difference between the breath and the speech.
Okay, so we'll say it again.
No, wait a minute. But what I'm not getting, I get that speech comes from the movement of tongue and lips, but doesn't breath also? And isn't breath also a verb? How is?
No, okay.
Not as God.
Okay, we're not talking about the lips.
Mm-hmm.
If I try to zero this down again, all these things they go without saying in Chassidus. It's not even explained, and therefore it's very easily misunderstood. When you say speech, again, there are usually we'll take this a little bit a step earlier. There are usually three examples of actions, right? There's thought, speech, and deed, we'll call it now, because we're using the word action as an archetype word for all three actions. Right? The garments of a soul. A person can do three things. He can think, he can speak, and he can act. Okay? It's called machshava, dibur, maaseh. Now, all three of these things are not things. That's very important to notice. That again, a doing, whether you're doing a thought or you're doing a speech or you're doing a movement, there's nothing here. Now, when you move something, then you're usually moving a thing, but the movement, the action itself, isn't a thing in of itself. That's what we call a verb. Is that understood?
Yes.
Now you can that exact logic is true about speech as well. Also, when I speak in a thing, like the air or the lips are things that I'm speaking into. But the action of speech isn't a thing. Just like the movement of a hand isn't a thing, then the speaking isn't a thing either. In the movement of a hand, I use my hand, which is a thing, and maybe I'm moving a plastic cup, that's also a thing, but the movement isn't a thing, right? The movement is a verb. Same thing when you speak. I mean, there's air involved and there's lips involved, but the speech is like the movement. It's an action, it's not a thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Also in thought, the same thing when I think. So the thought, here it's much easier to just like to sense this. That the thought isn't a thing. Why is it so easy? Because the thought isn't a thing, and I'm not even thinking about a thing. It's very easily realized that thought is something very spiritual, very non-tangible. This is the exact relationship between these three layers of action. When you say thought, then you easily, very often in Chassidus, you differ between these three allegories. Very often, creation will be allegorized to a thought of Hashem. In other places, it will be allegorized to the deeds of Hashem. The most classic allegory is the speech of Hashem. But you'll find all three. Now, what's the advantage of each angle, and what's the disadvantage of each angle? When you say speech, when you say thought, so the advantage of that allegory is that it describes very well how reality is not a thing. Like my thought is very easy for me to think of as being part of myself. What's the disadvantage of the allegory of thought? Very simple. The disadvantage is that it gives you the delusion that reality isn't real. Like if I think of reality as a thought of Hashem, then I get the misunderstanding as if it's like a delusion. It's not real. That's not true. Reality is very real. So then there's the allegory of action. Action is very tangible. It's so tangible that that's the advantage. That this is as if it's something Hashem created. Like this table is very real if it's the action of Hashem. But it's not so apparent that it's not a thing. It's just a verb. That's why the allegory of action, the advantage is that it depicts properly the truth of reality, the tangibility of reality, how Hashem created an actual physical creation. But it doesn't depict very well. It's harder to sense how that nonetheless that creation isn't a thing. It's just something Hashem's doing. And so the allegory of thought catches very well one edge and not the other. And the allegory of deed, of action, catches the other end, but kind of loses the sense of everything being annulled to Hashem. Does that make sense up until now?
Yes, yes.
So speech is a perfect intermediate where it has like a certain side of being tangible, right? You can sense speech, you hear it, it's more tangible than thought. Yet you can sense that it's not something. Now here, we went on to just to be more precise. It's very important for the understanding here. What is it in speech that when you say speech, what part of the process of speech is called speech? And just like when I say moving something, if I say moving the cup, right? So what am I allegorizing? So I'm not talking about the cup, and I'm not talking about my hand. I'm talking about the movement. That's called the action, right? The garment of action is the movement itself, which again isn't a thing, but it acts in a very tangible layer of reality. But still, the movement isn't a thing, right? That makes sense?
Yes.
Here, it's very easy to differentiate. If I move a cup, I'm not talking about the cup, I'm talking about the movement. Mm-hmm. Same thing when I say speech. When I say speech, I'm not talking about any of the physical participants. I'm just talking about the action of speech. Just like there's movement, there's speaking. It's not a thing. Again, just like when I said moving the cup, then it was relatively easy to separate between the movement and the cup. I'm not talking about the cup, I'm talking about the movement. Same thing in speech. I'm not talking about the air or the lips. I'm talking about the speech itself, which is just an action. It's nothing. It's just a verb. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So saying Hashem, when you say Hashem speaks reality, that's what the allegory is describing. It's describing just the verb. Otherwise, it would be as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I don't understand it that way, then what am I picturing? I'm picturing that there's air and lips, and then Hashem speaks. That's not what the allegory is coming to say. The allegory is coming to say that there's nothing, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's speech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu acts that there be a reality. So the reality is his action itself. He's not acting in a reality. He's acting the reality. Nahon?
I lost the original question.
Was it between the breath?
What I'm trying to allegorize with the Torah is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's action is the creation itself. Not that he acts not that he acts within an existing creation. Obviously, he creates the creation. We're looking to allegorize the action of creating, and we're allegorizing the action of creating to speech. So you can't use the prior existing factors of speech. We're not talking about the air or the lips. Again, just like the movement is not an allegory about the cup moving. It's just an allegory of the action of moving. And just like the action of movement isn't the thing, same thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates reality. The action of creation, which is the creation itself, isn't the thing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates things. Again, it's not like my movement. This is Hashem can create ex nihilo. He can make something out of nothing. Even though it's an action, it's nothing, but he acts it to be something. But that something is, again, it's his doing. The reality is itself Hashem's actions. It's not that he's acting upon a table, he's acting the table. So if you want to correlate the allegories, so my movement is the physical, in the allegory, my movement. So what it's describing in HaKadosh, if you view it from Hashem's view, is that the table itself is his movement. I can move a table. Hashem's movement is a table. That's what the table is. The table is Hashem tabling. Right? He's creating a table. So the table is his action. So it's similar to my movement. Just that my movement doesn't create anything. It's not a thing. It remains a nothing. But Hashem's action of creation is an actual creation. He's tabling, and that's what the table is. It's Hashem's tabling. Okay? And so the word the Torah uses is not moving. It's not movement. The Torah calls it speech. It doesn't call it movement. Okay, but which part of speech is the Torah referring to? It's talking about the action of speech. So the table is a HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking table. That's what the table is. But again, you have to strip the allegory of the context. And when we imagine speech, we always imagine speaking in a reality. We don't imagine speaking the reality. Right? So when I speak, I'm using prior existing air, lips, limbs, and I'm acting in that reality. But Hashem, he acts the reality itself. So when you say speech, you mean an action of Hashem. Say there? A breath of air is referring to the reality, not to the action. Just like in the allegory, the air isn't my speech. I didn't speak the air. The air was there before I spoke. It's not my action. I didn't act the air into existence. When I breathe, so the air is a tangible existing thing. It's not it's not an action of mine. It's an existing reality, right?
Okay.
When I speak, so the speaking is something I do. It's not a thing. It's something I do. But the air is something that exists. I didn't create the air, right?
Right.
Same thing in the allegory here. Saying that Hashem breathed is saying that he didn't create something. It's not something new, something that was. And a breath is what was. It's part of reality. Just like I'll say it again, take the allegory.
Why aren't you saying that air is also a verb? Even though it's already existing, it's Hashem is creating the air all the time too.
Yeah. You just need to bounce correctly between the allegory and what it's depicting.
Okay.
In the allegory, so we're separating between the air and the speech, right?
All right.
In the allegory, when I speak, not in Hashem's reality, in my reality, there's a difference between my speech and the air, right? Because the speech is something that I do, And the air is not something that I do. It's already there.
Okay.
I use air to speak, but I'm not creating the air. That's in my reality, right?
Okay.
Like in
Okay.
human proportions, there's a difference between speech and breath. Breath is you're breathing out air. You're not creating the air. The
Okay.
breath is something tangible. The action of speech is just a deed. It's not a thing. That's in again in the perspective of the human allegory. There's a difference between speech and breath, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Now, when the Torah uses this allegory to describe Hashem, it's also describing two different things within Hashem. When you say that Hashem spoke, then what you're implying is that Hashem did something. But if you say Hashem breathed, then what you're implying is that Hashem exposed himself. He didn't create something new.
As a noun.
Okay.
As a noun.
Okay. Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Got
the
it.
Torah describes our bodies or all of creations, all of the description of creation is something Hashem does. He speaks. Let there be light, let there be land. Everything is spoken. But the soul is not something Hashem speaks. It's something Hashem breathes. What is that implying? That it's part of what is, part of what was. It's not something new. It's not an action that he does, he brings into reality. It's part of what was. It's part of the noun. Does that make sense? Let's say this. So that's again, this is a very, very basic.
Yes. Thank you. Got it.
Understand.
Got it. I got it as much as I can get it.
Okay.
Thank
Again,
you.
if you can understand the allegory, and just like there's a difference between my speech and the air and my proportions, then that's the exact same thing with Hashem. Creation is things he does, but the soul is himself. It's part of what was. It's not something
Got
he did.
it. Okay. Thank you.
Very precise. Again, the Torah's allegories are very, very precise. That you have to be precise in understanding them as well. What exactly is being said? So what comes of that? This is where you reach the phrase Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamash. That the soul is a piece of Hashem. It's not an action of Hashem, it's a piece of Hashem. It's like cutting off a limb of your body as opposed to doing something. The doing is something new. But if I were to cut off your finger, then that's you. That's not something you did. So same thing here. The soul is like a piece of what was. So that's again, that's summarizing what we spoke about last week. Yeah.
I just have one question on what you just said, and I also have a question from last week. So from what you just said, there's a point where I got a little confused. The soul is Hashem breathed the soul into us, but since speech is used as the mashal for creation, then there is an element of breath in speech.
No, there's no element of breath.
You're saying there's no element. You're saying that when we're speaking about it, but it is based on breath. It is another part.
Anything we do, we are doing within an already existing creation. But the doing, again, just like the allegory of moving a cup, there's a cup involved, but the movement is not the cup. Same thing in speech.
You're saying the emphasis for the rest of creation. The emphasis for the rest of creation is not on the breath of Hashem, but on the speech itself. We're not looking at the breath aspect of speech, because in other places in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe does speak about the breath aspect of speech being shaped by the 5 organs of speech, speaking about our speaking. So
no, that's the exact opposite. What that's looking to say is that the speech is the action of the 5 organs. It's not the breath. That's exactly what the Alter Rebbe wants to say. The speech, when you say speech, you mean what you're doing to the air, not the air itself. The doing is the speech. It's a verb. Speaking is a verb. Mm-hmm. Now, all of our verbs, any allegory we bring, will always be existing within a tangible reality. That's because we exist within a tangible reality. But the doings that we do, we never do the tangibility itself. We just act upon the tangibility.
I see. So when we say Hashem created everything else with his speech, we're not talking about the breath aspect of speech, but the
No.
action aspect of
Nachon.
speech.
And what we're looking to say is that everything that exists is actions that Hashem's doing. Everything is
Okay,
an
so
action.
got it. So I have one question on last week's that back to we were talking about Nishmas Yisrael Alu B'Makshava. And well, last Thursday when Rabbi Yitzchak was speaking, and he mentioned this, and he connected it with something that I've often seen it in context with b'minim loch.
Minimlach, nachon.
Minim loch. Yes. So there's something, but I couldn't understand the rest of it was too advanced of read for me to understand. But there's still something I don't grasp about it. Could you just connect those two ideas together?
Alu b'machshava.
And b'min, right? Because it's often put in the same context of b'minim.
With b'minimlach. Okay, so again, I'll explain it from the angle we've studied it here, in continuation to what we just rehearsed just now.
Okay.
So in continuation to that portion of the beginning of chapter 2, he then brings two quotations depicting this concept of the difference between breath and speech. I mean, that allegory of breath and speech is explicit in Sefer Bereshit. And the Zohar also elaborates on the difference between the two.
Yes.
The Alter Rebbe, in light of that understanding that we just explained, explains two other verses. One that calls very often the Jews being Hashem's children. That's one. B'ni b'chori, that you're my son. And the other is that the Jews arose in thought. Alu b'machshava, that the soul is something that came up in thought. He explains these two verses in light of the Zohar's contemplation on the difference between speech and breath. What's the correlation? Again, if we manage to explain the original allegory, I hope these two verses will be easily understood. Just like we just now stressed, that when you say breath, you're implying something being part of the existence, not an action. Same thing, a child isn't something you do. You didn't do a child. It's a portion of yourself. You know, it's something that's a piece of you physically. It's a piece of you. It's a developed, evolved piece of you. But it's not something you do, right? Like if I make you my friend, then I've done something. But if I make you like my child and I haven't done something, it's like physically, it's a piece of me. That's how he explains that idiom in the Torah. Same thing the Alter Rebbe says about the phrase alu b'machshava, that saying that the souls arose in thought is implying that it's, again, here it's a little bit trickier. Why is it a little bit trickier? Because if you recall, 5 minutes ago, we just used the term thought as an example for an action, not for a breath, right? We said that thought is one of the actions, like levusha machshava. But here, thought isn't implying that it's an action. The opposite. Here, it wants to say that the soul is part of the essence. But he still uses the phrase thought. Like you could ask that question, what I just said. You notice the difficulty I just pointed out. Like, I'm making a mess, even though nobody asked this, but I'm asking the question. Right? A second ago, we said that thought is also something I do. And here he's bringing thought as an example for what he just explained, that the soul is not something Hashem does. It's part of what Hashem is. It's part of the essence. But he's using thought as an example. So how will we explain that? It's not. This isn't really a question. It's just, you could have this question. Okay, so what does the phrase aroused in thought? What is it implying? So we'll answer it easily. You could say that the main word in this phrase, aroused in thought, is aroused, not thought. Alu b'machshava means that it's not a thought that I did. No, it's something that came, like it spread into came up into my mind. You came up out of me. That's the way the phrase is implying. That it came to thought from within. I'll give you an example.
Wait a minute, Rabbi, isn't that what Chokhmah is?
Yeah, nachon. That's why he says that this thought here is referring to Chokhmah. That's exactly what he's going to say.
See what a good student I am now, Rabbi?
Was that?
Your moments.
No, I say you should get Naches. See, I got something. Yeah, okay.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Again, that's exactly the phrase he's going to use. But I didn't want to phrase it that way because I don't want to turn it into like a Kabbalistic dispute of where to put these. It's not a technical explanation that here thought means chokhmah, but somewhere else thought means just the garment of thought. It's all the same thing. It's just that here, what the phrase is saying is that the soul came from within into thought. It's not. There's like a superficial angle of thought. It's just something you do. And if I look at thought that way, then thought is no different than speech or action. It's just something I do. But saying that something aroused into my thought is saying that the thing that aroused was there before the thought. And it just aroused into my thought. If I move, then the movement didn't arouse. I did it. It wasn't there until I did it. It didn't exist. There was no such thing as a movement until I moved my hand. Right. So same thing. Creation, no such thing. Hashem created it. Before He created it, it just wasn't. Hashem's doing it, and if He doesn't do it, it won't be because there's nothing but His doing, and it wasn't there before He did it. Saying that the soul arose in thought is implying that the soul was part of the thinker, and then he thought it. Again, it's not that he thought it and it came into existence. It's part of him and it arose into thought. He
Can I
existed.
please add something?
Yeah.
I'm stuck on a different angle. This is only Jews, not all people.
All people are creations, just like any other creation. That's all actions that Hashem's doing. Everything.
No,
in
but the
creation
soul part that He
is
breathes
Hashem's
in.
doing. The breath is only in this. Is only.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
I could give you a better answer, but I think understanding what I'll say will be very difficult. So I'll say it anyway.
Like blushing. Oh, sorry.
I mean, why am I trepidatious of saying this? Because I fear that if I say what I'm about to say, it's going to mix everybody up. Because up until now, in order to understand the concepts, we were very adamant about separating, like I answered Shoshana, we were very, very adamant about separating between the action of speech and the breath, like in the allegory, right? The breath is part of the isness, and the action of speech is just the action, right? So in order to understand things correctly, we were very careful to separate these two sides of the allegory and to notice how they imply two completely different things about Hashem, right? So in order to answer Chavi's question, I'll have to contradict myself, seemingly. And I don't want it to mix everybody up. So I'll say it, but you have to mamish think about what's being said now, because it's very profound. The way we explain things now, in order to make it easier, and it's also not so easy, but to make it a little bit easier to understand. So like I said, we separated between speech and breath. And then when I took those two aspects of the allegory of the human speech and breath, and I projected them on Hashem, so it helped me understand the difference between the creations and the soul. But when that separation, seeing it that way ends up giving you the feeling that Hashem doesn't really speak at all. It's just an allegory. Right? He does things. He doesn't speak at all. He does things. And we're allegorizing. There are things that are similar to action, and there are things that are similar to breath. Okay? Things that are part of His essence, and things that are superficial deeds. But not that Hashem is speaking. That's not what's written in the Torah. In the Torah, it says that Hashem mamish talks. He speaks. It's hard to understand it that way. Why? Because what does that mean? That really all of creation is a concoction of breath and action. Just like my speech is a concoction of breath and action. Once I say that, so I've contradicted myself. So again, is this cup something Hashem's doing, or is it part of Hashem's essence? Is it a breath, or is it a speech? So if I say Hashem's really speaking, just like I speak, so every speech is, again, acting upon a breath. That's what speech is. So then everything is a breath, and everything is also a deed. That would make it much more complicated to think about. That's how the Torah describes it more precisely. Just in a word, in our previous explanation, we made a very clear-cut differentiation between all of creation being Hashem's deeds, and only the soul is a breath. Like the Torah says, "Vayipach be'apiv nishmat chayim." But really, there is an element of breath in any speech. In my life, I don't have to say Hashem's like that, but the Torah implies that way. Okay, so that again, this is all just in order to refer to what Javi asked, that really Hashem, if I say Hashem's doing everything, then you could say deep down inside, everything is a godly soul. Let's say, say that the allegory of action. I move my hand, the movement. So up until now, we said that the creation, this cup is Hashem's movement. So a movement is nothing. Yeah, but I could also say that what does it mean a movement is nothing? My hand is inside the movement. Because the movement's nothing, then the mover is entirely inside the movement. So if I say it that way, then Hashem's essence is the true reality of everything. This is explained in Shaykhul Dumna. He says this explicitly, exactly what he says here, that there's chokhmah, like a aroused thought, which is the Jew's soul. He says that explicitly about a rock, about a stone in Shaykhul Dumna. Right? Even in a stone, there's a very, very contracted, concealed, there's all of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's self. And just like in my movement, the mover is doing the move, so he's inside the movement. And so this cup or this table being tabled by Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu it's like he's in it. He's tabling it. That's how he explains what the Arizal says, that the table has a soul, like it's living. It's a living thing because it's Hashem's doing it. But it's completely, completely concealed. There's no awareness. It doesn't penetrate the table's reality, the table's awareness. That's why he doesn't call it a soul. He doesn't call it a godly soul because it's not an awareness. So you could say that even a non-Jew, definitely, but about a non-Jew, this is much more obvious because a non-Jew, this element can penetrate his awareness and then he can convert and be a Jew.
Right, okay, thank you.
A stone can't convert.
Right.
But not only is a non-Jew this way, even a stone really is, again, all of its mass is only Hashem. It's only the essence of Hashem, just like a soul. Just like a movement is just a container to the mover. So not only can you say that on a much more profound angle, a non-Jew also has a godly soul somewhere. You could even say that about a rock. Again, about a non-Jew, it's not such a chiddush to say this, because that's obviously the case. He could even become a Jew. But if you say it about a monkey can't convert. And if you say it about a stone, like a physical stone, a piece of rock, So that's kilu. It's very hard to fathom. What does that mean? That the rock is also the mover. But that's the case. So again, I hope that didn't mess everybody up, because to understand correctly, you have to first differentiate between the breath and the action in the speech. Really, again, it's a somewhat technical, it's not a real differentiation. Because Hashem, he speaks. It's not just an allegory. Before, when we discussed it, we just said it's an allegory. Just like in a human being, there's a difference between speech and breath. So it's an allegory for the difference between the soul and creation. But really, it's not just an allegory, because it says that Hashem spoke. It doesn't say that he did something like speech. It said that he mamash spoke. So really, Hashem's speech is completely real. It's Hashem speaking. And therefore, all of reality is somewhere, it's his self, it's the speaker. But it's completely not apparent. And in apparency, so there's a difference between the breath, which is a tangible feeling, something that already was, it's not something renewed, and the action, which is only something renewed. But really, the doer, like the part that's we're referring to the breath, is inside the action as well, somewhere. So I hope that that makes sense.
What about the b'minim lach? Did you say?
Sorry. So we haven't gotten to the b'minim lach. I should have done that first, but I apologize. The b'minim lach is another phrase in Chazal that says, Chazal ask, who did HaKadosh Baruch Hu consult with before creation? It's called b'minim lach. Lehimalech in Hebrew means to consult, or to consider, take into account someone's opinion. So whose opinion was taken into account? Who did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have a meeting with before he created? So it says that who did he consult with? He consulted with the Jewish souls, Benishmot Yisrael. Now, again, what is that implying in light of what we just said? That again, that the souls are part of the self. They're not something renewed in creation. They were there in the consultation room before anything was done. So they're part of the doer. They're not part of what's being done. That's the simple meaning of b'minim lach. The souls were already there in the process of creating themselves. So they're part of the breath. They're part of the being that's doing. They're not part of what's being done, of the doings. They're part of the doer. That's the simple connection between b'minim lach and alu b'machshava. They're both implying the same thing, that the soul arose from within. It already was part of the doer. Say that?